now starting to touch on the topic of accountability. And there was a CEO that I was talking to, I think it was about 2 years ago, who was saying, if I have an environmental issue, I've got a problem. If there's an health and safety issue, I've got a problem. But if I've got a cyber issue, it's just data. And as horrifying as it was for me to be sitting there in that meeting, it was like, he had a valid point. So, but where do you see accountability for this, panning out?
Where should it? I would like to see it escalate up within the business. The more the senior executives are accountable for risks to their information. The Corporations Act requires executives and directors to manage risk to their business. The cyber risk is just another risk dimension that they need to be considering, and if they're not making those choices, if they continue to not take a responsibility even for taking some action on this, then we're always going to see the problems we've got now, where it's a surprise when we've gotten a breach. When all of a sudden everybody's in avoidance mode, it's, well, no, blame, someone else to blame. And in incidents, when these things happen, IT get the blame. It's our network defences that were poor, or we didn't patch our systems, or whatever the fundamental control that failed is. But the fundamental control that failed wasn't really the technical control. It was the fact that they did not understand what they were supposed to be doing.
And we've seen, unfortunately, a number of cases where executives have historically been in active denial about this as being a problem. And one of the more telling ones, an executive asked us to do a big social engineering exercise, do a phishing exercise, do a physical penetration test, prove that we could get on to their property, prove that their people would click on malware. We provided them a scope of work for it. They came back and they said they loved the scope of work. It exactly met their needs. They had a budget and it was within the budget. I was saying, great, so when can we start? And they said, well, we're not going to do the work. And I said, I don't understand it. You said this meets your scope and it meets your budget. And he said, we don't want to deal with the results. If you write down this on a piece of paper that says we have these areas that we need to improve, we'll have to do something about it. And we don't want to do something about it. So thank you very much for your scope. We appreciate the effort you put in, but we're doing nothing. That level of active stuffing your head in the sand because we're not prepared to deal with the reality that we live in is slightly scary.
See, this is interesting because now we're touching on the culture conversation. And what we're talking about there is an organisation that at some level is going, we don't want to take this action because we don't want to have to deal with the consequences. And there could be a range of different reasons why they don't want to deal with them. Either they don't want to be faced against something they don't know how to deal with, or they don't feel they have the resources. But you guys seeing this a lot in the industry?
In a number of industry segments, the highly regulated industries tend not to be able to take that strategy, the avoidance strategy, because they're regulators, there are third parties who are expecting to see some level of evidence that they're doing what they say they do, and that those controls that they've selected or the strategies they've chosen are effective. But there are many types of industries and our client base, within our client base, where the need to educate people on taking responsibility and being accountable for some of the choices they make is something that is very prevalent, very strong, and key to making a difference in how they manage security. Because until people stop avoiding, we're not going to get any change in their posture or their culture. And some of that might be the organisations where they traditionally are very risk aware but accepting. So they'll sign off on risks rather than treat them, because that's what they say that their risk management process says they can do, and that's what they then do. Is it because they don't have the resources to do it? Is it because they're just trying to avoid doing the work? Is it because that they know that doing the work will open up some other areas where they really don't want the torch shone on those particular areas because they know there's vulnerabilities in those spaces they haven't yet managed? For whatever reason, they actively avoid the work. And that active avoidance is not a cultural choice that we like to see.
I understand that this might sound a tad cynical, but I think that part of their choices, they realise that their real risk is an external auditor coming in and having an adverse finding against them. So they set up their processes to ensure that it passes an audit. but passing, and it does, consistently passes an audit right up until the time they get breached. These issues, if they're not dealt with systemically, if they're not dealt with at the root cause level, and if accountability isn't held at the right place, you get tick-in-the-box security. We did it because we were told to do a thing. We did the minimum possible thing we could do to achieve the outcome of not getting an adverse audit finding.
So let me challenge you on that. What's wrong with that?
Practically nothing, as long as it's a conscious decision to evaluate the cost of one choice versus another. I think they have a very good idea of the cost of an adverse finding and what it will take to their business. I don't think they have a good idea of the cost of the other side. I don't think it's an informed choice. Keeping a business running is the key thing for any business to do. Anything that they're doing that is in excess of the protection that they need to keep it running is probably a spend better put somewhere else. But if you don't understand what your choices mean, and if you haven't properly costed those choices, then again, you feel really confident right up to the point you get breached.
And your point about they're doing it for the wrong reasons and doing it to avoid negative or detrimental findings is one that you do see, we certainly see within the industry. It's a very common strategy and a very common driver for some of the choices that people make for security. But as Phil pointed out, they're making the choice from the wrong mindset. They've got to shift their paradigm to go, their job is to stay in business, to keep their organisation operating. We should be looking at the choices that we're making in terms of managing the risk to those operations as opposed to the risk of a negative audit finding, because negative audit findings will go to board audit, and therefore I've got to front up to board audit and explain why we've got this negative finding. So we have to ask whether the things that the choices they make there are actually the intent, and the control implementation might be there, but is it really working the way that you would want it to work to manage the risk of the organisation? Sometimes people choose to do things which are a waste of money, effectively a waste of a limited set of resources. They are choosing to do things because they expect that that's what they need to be done, because they know the auditor is going to come in and look at this. I've been in the industry a long time, and in my mainframe security days, it was very common to be asked the same question by different groups of auditors working from some checklist approach without understanding what the risk was. Why were they asking that question in the first place? And we still see that today. What we happen is the people that are asking these questions probably don't really have an understanding of the context of the question, how important it is to that business. Because for a start, they're external when they come in and they are trying to address risk to the organisation, and they are doing it from some baseline. And that doesn't necessarily get the best outcome. What you really want to do is to move past that and go, in an organisational context, what does this mean?
So based on what both of you have been saying, I'm hearing sort of two areas. One of them is the opportunity to actually have a better understanding of the organisation and its operating risks. And as long as they're just going accepted to whatever, or just the compliance management side of things, there's clearly the lack of preparedness to actually go that level deeper and actually understand what's going on. But there's also got to be an opportunity cost as well in terms of what are they overlooking. In terms of how could we actually enhance or enable the organisation from a wider perspective?
It's an interesting disconnect. Most businesses have a strategic plan. Most businesses know what they're trying to achieve. Most businesses have a plan to do that over a number of years, and they address that properly and strategically and at a board level, and that's fine. But they address risk tactically. They don't have a strategic plan of risk. They don't have a strategic view on how to manage their information assets. They have we have a thing that needs to be done right now, fix it, go away, move on. Fix it, go away, move on. Fix it, go away, move on. So to David's point, no one's going to the root cause. No one's going to try and address the systemic levels that is going. And the board isn't taking a strategic view of risk typically. they're also saying just fix the problem, make it go away. Eventually you've got to
But
start.
of course, cybersecurity isn't a problem to be fixed.
Right.
It's a condition to be managed. So
Indeed, it exactly matches risk management. The interesting thing about risk management is that word management. You're supposed to manage risk, it's not risk acceptance. We don't talk about a risk acceptance
Or
policy.
risk avoidance.
Or risk avoidance policy. We talk about risk management. But most organisations take a very, very tactical view of risk. And that, I think, leads us a lot to where we find ourselves today.
One of the interesting challenges that I see in the space that Phil's, particularly in the space that Phil's just been talking about, is that in the cyber risk registers or in organisational risk registers with the cyber risks, the intent of many is to remove the risks from the risk register, which means implementing controls to the point where they can now accept the risks and then they'll disappear from that. The point is, as soon as you lose visibility of the risk, you lose management capability of the risk. So that's exactly the wrong strategy, but that's ingrained in the way that they think about organisational risk management, to go, well, we have to report on everything in here. We want to make some of these things disappear so we don't have to report on them. And that is the wrong approach. It's saying, well, those risks are now invisible to us as an organisation. And they're not, because unless you stop doing the activity that generated the risk or the opportunity in the first place, they're always there. And so, as you pointed out, James, in the fact that we're losing the opportunity to leverage some of these choices that we're making for the benefit of the business, because we have avoided making enough or involving ourselves enough in understanding the context of the risk and the context of what we're trying to do and what we're trying to achieve. This and the alignment of Phil's point about the alignment of the security objectives with the strategic objectives is there's a disconnect there that doesn't always happen within organisations, and they don't have strategic security plans.
And I think that our industry has not made itself the best friends historically. Security's always been the department of no. No, you can't do this. No, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. No, you can't innovate. No, you can't have a new toy. You can't have any of these, which have built an internal organisational culture of avoiding it. Right? You guys want to say no a lot. We don't want to hear no.
therefore, we're not going to talk to you.
Therefore, we're not going to talk to you. Now, we have really actively tried as an industry to move to the yes and here's how, but there's still a stigma and an attached culture of no to security. So it's easy if one go, too much of a pain dealing with you guys. We're going to innovate. We're going to take the opportunities. The risk teams, the security teams, even the technology teams can help get the right outcome. But they're not asked anymore because they're seen as part of the problem, not part of the solution. And we really have to work to address this.
Traditionally, security is seen as a roadblock to activity. And then IT is traditionally seen as a disconnected from the business and not responsive enough to the business. And so what we get is the shadow IT that's popped up, where parts of the business are making their own choices about that. And cloud has facilitated some of the adoption of the shadow IT model. But then we've got the fact that nobody is involving themselves in the risk equation. They're not having the conversations about what risks are involved in this and then making some choices about those. Not saying you can't use cloud or that going out and seeking more effective and efficient solutions is a bad thing. It's a good thing. But there's always a risk-reward model, and you've got to have the conversations. And those conversations aren't happening because they don't want to go back to security because they're going to say no. We're going to say, we want to put this in the cloud, and they're going to say no. Yeah. Or we want to do this. No. We've got to get past that model to go, if security is involved in the conversations early enough, then they can do all of those things, but at least they understand the choices they're making during the time. And that's the cultural challenge that is hard for businesses to take on board, because it could be that the security person's too technical and can't understand business, or it could be that they don't have internal resources to have those conversations with, or it could be they don't understand risk. As an organisation, they don't have enough knowledge or skill within the organisation to make those choices, make those assessments.